Yo, what's up guys? Titanhawk here again today, and I'm going to show you how to use the StartGG API using JavaScript. So let's go ahead, get right into it. Alright guys, so the first thing you're going to want to do today is you're going to want to head over to the StartGG developer portal. You can do this by typing in StartGG API into Google or whatever search engine you prefer. I'll also put a link to this down below in the description for you to access. Here we're going to need to make sure we go ahead and create our authentication token. This is that way when you pass it into your HTTP request for the backend. That way it is able to authenticate you and you are able to access the StartGG data. To do this, you just click on the authentication tab over here. You go ahead and head down to the developer settings, this button right here that is hyperlinked. You go ahead, click that. It'll open up a new tab. And you can see here, you can it'll prompt a login screen. I'm already logged in. If you have a StartGG account, you can log in. If you don't, you can create one. Super easy to do. And then once you are here, I already have this API token desktop created. But for you, you're gonna see nothing here if you've never created a token before or if you just created your account. So to do that, you're just gonna go ahead and hit create new token. And you're gonna go ahead and give your token a description. So for me, I'm just gonna say test. So then you go ahead and hit save. Once you put in your description, you can really put whatever you want here as long as you remember what this is. You go ahead and hit save, and here we go. You'll see here that you'll have this token created. Now, big thing here, make sure you go ahead and copy this token, because once you say you have copied my token, you cannot see this token again. You go ahead, copy it. Once you've copied it, you can say I've copied my token, and you are ready to move on to the next step. So the next thing you're going to want to do is open up your preferred code editor. Personally, I prefer Visual Studio Code. If you'd like to see my ideal setup for Visual Studio Code, and I have it all across my different machines, let me know down in the comments section below. So the first thing I'm going to do, since I have that token copied to my clipboard, I'm going to create a new file called .env. So this file here is essentially all of the environment variables that we can store in our folder. That way we can access them when we're coding our way to communicate with the API. So the big thing we're going to want to do is make sure we store our key here. So the reason I choose an env file as well is if I were to push this code to GitHub or some other public repository where other people can see it, then I don't want people to be able to see my token. So we can go ahead and just say StartGG key equals double quotes for a string, and we go ahead and paste our key in there. We'll go ahead and save it. Now for the next step, we're going to want to make sure we set up the rest of our JavaScript files, including our package.json file, which is going to have two code modules that we're going to want to use. We're going to do open up a new terminal, which you can do with the shortcut Control-Shift backtick. Control-Shift backtick. And you can see here, it's going to open up a new terminal here at the bottom of the screen. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say npm install.env. This right here is going to allow us to have the code package for the env file. That way in our JavaScript file, we are able to parse this key here, and we're able to use it throughout our code. Now this next step is going to be really important. We're going to install the node fetch node module, but we want a specific version as this is proven to have worked with the StartGG API. So we're going to do npm install node dash fetch, and then we're going to do and then we want version 3.2.10. We'll go ahead, press enter, let that install, and now we have everything created and set up, and we are now ready to actually begin coding our connection to the StartGG API. Now there are a couple things I want to make sure that we clarify before moving any further. So sending requests to an API, how is it going to work with the StartGG API? Well, the StartGG API uses GraphQL for their data storage and their data management. So we're going to want to make sure we have this link copied right here. The other thing too, if you are familiar with API requests and REST APIs, you'll likely think that you'll want to do a GET request here. This is not recommended with the StartGG API. They recommend using a POST request as it is less error prone and easier to maintain. So you can see here with the application or with the post body, we're going to keep this in mind here. We're going to have our query, our operation name, which I won't have in this video as an example, as I have found that you don't need the operation name. It's mainly there if you want to have it. But we will for sure want to have our variables, because we're going to be passing some variables into the API requests. That way we can get data. And speaking of API requests, one other thing we can do here, if you also want to do this in your own time, I highly recommend it. You can see all the query examples here that StartGG provides for you. You can go ahead, say you want to get the event entrance. It will go ahead and tell you all of it'll set the query up for you. So you can say event entrance, event ID, which I'll show you how to get as our first example, because you're going to find that with a lot of these, you can't really get any data if you don't know the event ID. The other thing I recommend as well, if you are unfamiliar with GraphQL, I recommend looking up a little bit of an intro to or introduction to it, and especially at a beginner level. But enough of that, we'll go ahead and jump right into setting up our JavaScript file to get the event ID first. Okay, so we're back here in Visual Studio Code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new file. We can call this index.js. You can call this whatever you like. I'm just going to call it index.js. Go ahead, press enter. So now, first and foremost, there are a couple things I want to do at the top of the file for import statements and constants we're going to be using throughout the code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to make sure we require the .env node package that we installed at the beginning, and we're going to want to set that to, we're going to want to call config on that. This is what's going to allow us to use our token throughout the code without people that look at this code actually to see what that is. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to import the fetch function that we're going to use to call the API and send our HTTP requests with. So this is a little bit tricky with the version that we're using, but we can go ahead and do const fetch equals parentheses .. arrow import from node fetch then parentheses, another set of parentheses, and then curly brackets, default fetch. And then I'm just checking my notes over here, as this is a really long function call here, but it's we need it in order to have this work. And then we go ahead and do arrow again, fetch args. So it does look like a lot, but this is what I use in my other code, and I know that this works. What we're going to do here is we're going to do const start gg URL. So now we're going to go ahead and copy this over from the API page. I want this as a string, and you can find this again right on the API documentation page. The last thing we can do, this is entirely optional for you, is you can do const start gg key, and you can do process.env and you start typing it out, start gg key. And we can go ahead and double check this last part here. Make sure this is identical to whatever you named it in here. So for me, I named it start gg _ key, all caps. Make sure it is the exact same thing, and you'll be able to use it. So now that we got all that set up, we're now ready to create our first function to run and find ourselves a event ID. To start, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create two new lines here, and we're going to go ahead and do const getEventId. We're going to go ahead and create a new function here. We're going to want a tournament name and our event name. And I'll explain why in just a second, because it's going to have something to do here with this variable we're going to create called event slug. So with the StartGG API, what they do, how they store information specific to tournaments and events that they host, is they have it all in a path kind of structure with a string. And that structure is tournament / tournament name / event / event name. And this is what they call the slug, and this is how we're able to get the exact tournament that we want. So the next thing we're going to do then, since this is a get event ID, we're going to want to return an event ID at the end of this. So what we can do is say let event ID. We don't know what that is going to be for now, but at the end we'll return the event ID. So now here's the fun part here. We're going to call the fetch function. We're going to do fetch. And then the first thing we want to pass in is the start GG URL. We need to tell it where to look. The next here is going to be our all the API requests and using the endpoint that they have. The first thing we want to add is the method. And now with REST APIs, there are 4 main methods: get, post, put, and delete. I believe those are the main 4. But as it mentioned in the documentation, what are we going to want? We're going to want to post. Then we'll do a comma. And the next thing here is going to be the headers. So inside here, we're going to tell the API what kind of data we want. Again, they mention this in the documentation. So if you ever get stuck when you're developing with APIs, always check the documentation. So the first thing we want to say is, what kind of content do we want? How do we want to receive this? What are we looking for? Is there any specific format? And we do this by passing content type, colon, and then yes, we do. We want a specific one. We want JSON. That way we're easily able to go through the object and go through it. If you don't know what JSON is, it is JavaScript object notation. And we're able to get all the information we want out of that really easily. And then we're going to want to make sure we pass in an accept header. And then also that will be the same thing, application/JSON. Now there's one more thing that we're going to need here, and you don't need the string for it: authorization. And now this is going to be how we tell the backend that we are able to access this information. So what this will be is going to be bearer space, make sure you have the space there, and then plus start GG key. So what this does here is, they also mention this in the documentation, that you need to make sure you have bearer space and then your key that you store in your environment file. These are all the headers we need. These are just the main 3 that we need. And now we are ready to write the body of the request to the API. We're going to do body colon JSON.stringify parentheses curly braces. And now inside here, this is where we're going to put our query. So this is how we're going to tell specifically the API what we are looking for. So I have it copy and pasted here, and I'll go ahead and explain it real quick. So we follow GraphQL syntax with having it first be query space the name of the query, and then the parameters that we're going to pass in. So you can kind of guess where this is going with the slug. This is why we have this event slug up here, is we're going to pass this in. And from there, start GG is going to be able to say, oh, I recognize this slug. I can tell you the event, the ID, and the name of the event. You're probably wondering, the next thing we got to do is, how does it know what variable to use for slug? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do next. We're going to head and create a variables structure, or a variable object here, curly braces, and we're going to say slug. That way it's the exact same name as the parameter. And we're going to say event slug. Now we send it the information, but we're not really doing anything with it. So all we have to do then down here is just do dot then, and we're going to call this R, pretty much for return, or what we get from the API. And we're just going to want to convert this to JSON. That way we're able to access it in the next step, which we're going to do another dot then. And we're going to call this data, arrow function, curly brace. I can say console.log data.data. And now when we run this, you'll see what this does. But then I can also say eventId equals data.data.event.id. Now we'll go ahead and save up our new terminal. Now you're going to do node index.js. If all is correct, this should be able to compile and run without any error. Do getEventId. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Collegiate Rocket League tournament as an example. But you'll notice here how there is a lot of similarity between everything after start GG and the end of this URL. This is, again, the breakdown of the event slug. So your event slug is always going to be anything from tournament / the tournament name slash event slash the specific event name. That is your event slug. And now how we know what the tournament name and the event name is, it's always whatever is after the word before it. So tournament and now slash, we know this is going to be our tournament name. Then we have event slash, we know this is our event name. So what we can do in here is we're going to say, hey, our tournament name is CCA Open 2022-2023. And our event name is West Fall Open 3. Our command again, node index.js. We pass it, boom, look at that. In our response, we get the event, the ID 755384, and the name of our tournament. So now that we know that that works, what we're going to do now is we're going to create another request. And this time I'm going to show you how to get completed matches from the StartGG API. So what we can go ahead and do is do const getCompletedMatches, and we can say equals, we're going to want an event ID as our parameter, and we can pass that into our arrow function here. So in short, the only thing that's really going to change is the query. I already have the query copy and paste. It's a much longer one, but I'll go through it. That way you understand. So now that we have this copy and pasted, we don't need event ID because that doesn't belong to this function. We're still going to want to do console.log data.data. And then instead of this as our event query, what we're going to want now is this query here. So this one is really, really long, but I'll walk you through it here. So it's a little bit tricky with when making requests, you have to make sure your query string is all one line. Otherwise, then the API tends to not really want to recognize it, and it will give you back an error and it won't work. But luckily, we look at this, but this time we're getting event sets. So matches and competition play in StartGG is classified as event sets. So what we can do is, now that we know we have our event ID, we can say, hey, I know this is an event that is completed. I can go ahead and say, I want you to give me the first page of 5 completed matches with this specific event. What you'll notice here is the page info in total. This is going to tell us the total number of matches and pages that there are with this request. So if you want to loop this, this is the variable you're looking for here, is this total variable. Then this nodes here, this indicates a list. So with StartGG, if you see nodes, this is a array or a list object. So depending on the number of our variable for per page will tell you how many items should be in this list. I say should because say you said you had 10 as your per page variable, but there were only 5 matches played. It's going to try to give you 10 for the size of your list, but in reality, you're only going to find 5. So you got to be careful with that. Now we got to change our variables, right? So we know our event ID is the main one we really should focus on here. So we can say event ID, and that's just our event ID. Now there's 2 others we got to provide. We need an integer per page. So for this example, we're going to do 1, and per page, we're going to say 5. That way, super easy for us to read and look at. What we can do down here is say getCompletedMatches, and then now this should be an integer here. So what we can go ahead and do, we know that with this previous one, we have the ID 755384. So I'll go ahead and type that out, 384 semicolon. We're gonna go ahead and save, check. We do node index.js. We go ahead and run it. And you can see here, we did get some information from the API. So what we'll go ahead and do real quick is we'll say console.log data.data.sets.nodes. And for this, we can say we do nodes 0 for this example. That way here I can show you that we actually got information instead of it saying, oh, we just got an array back. Nah, that's not fun. We'll go ahead and run this again. And you can see here, we have more information. So it just keeps getting more and more in depth. You can see we got the ID that we expected from over here. And then we got our slots, and then we have our entrant, and we can go ahead and get the name of that as well. So again, you can see there's a lot of data here, but you can keep accessing it and keep getting further into the JSON object, and you'll be able to keep accessing data. All right, everyone, that is going to be it for this tutorial. If you have any questions regarding how to access the StartGG API or anything that you saw in this video that was unclear, please put it down in the comment section below, and I will do my best to respond to you as fast as I can in a timely manner. Also, I highly recommend, I only showed you 2 requests that you can do with the event sets and the event name and the ID. I highly recommend you explore the documentation to see what kind of data you can access using those GraphQL queries. Other than that, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. Until then, my name is Titanhawk, and I'll see you next time.